Good afternoon to you, Jeffrey. Do you think this could finally lower drug prices for Americans?
It's a start. Pfizer is the least popular of all the drug companies among Trump's base. And so I think maybe he had to get the hard part over with first. So there was some uncomfortable optics in the White House with the head of Pfizer meeting with Kennedy and Dr. Oz and Trump and so on. But generally, the import of what he's doing here is highly significant. The backdrop here is that in the U.S., drugs are sometimes 10 times more expensive, twice and 10 times more expensive than the same drug, and just across the borders. And every American who's traveled to the UK, Mexico, or Canada, or the Far East, knows this. They could get the same drugs vastly cheaper in foreign countries, and it raises the question why. And the reason is that the U.S. government has not negotiated these prices downwards. So it ends up that the U.S. is subsidizing everybody else in the world, and the drug companies are perfectly happy with this. Well, he put out an executive order in consultation with his public health team earlier this year that just said, look, the U.S. is not going to pay any more for these drug prices, meaning Medicare and Medicaid, which feeds into what the private insurers are willing to pay, which is how these costs are determined, is how prices are determined. He said, we're not going to pay any more than the lowest price in other favored nations around the world. And so that was a shock. This is something the Democrats have wanted to get done for probably decades, and Trump did it against the recommendations of Wall Street and so on and so on. But I think it was a wonderful step because the pricing system as it existed doesn't make any sense. So this is part of that larger fabric. So Pfizer was the first company to come in and agree to the terms, and everybody else is going to follow Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and all the other pharmaceutical companies. And with that, Trump is getting agreements to invest in the U.S. instead of always making his pharmaceutical products abroad, which is actually a very serious problem that the U.S. has right now. Is we essentially don't have any pharmaceutical manufacturing in the U.S. So he's trying to do all these things at the same time, and these are extraordinary steps. Like I say, people have been trying to get this done for decades, and Trump's the first one to actually do it.
Can I ask you what you think as to what is the likely long-term consequences of most favored nation pricing on U.S. consumer drugs?
Well, it's definitely going to lower the prices. Now, are they going to get as cheap as they have been abroad, or are prices abroad going to go up, and we're going to meet somewhere in the middle? I think it's an empirical question. My guess is that we're going to see more of equilibrium pricing across all world pharmaceuticals. That world is coming to us soon, which is exactly what free trade theory would predict. David Ricardo in the 19th century used to talk about the law of one price, that under a free trade system, everything would tend to cost the same amount in all countries in the world. So I think that's what's going to happen. Prices are going to go up in foreign countries. They're going to probably come down in the U.S. So it's good for Americans, no question. But you're going to pay the same price in the U.S. that you could get that drug in Sweden or the UK or Mexico? Probably not immediately, but it is going to lower the cost of prescription medications. And that's going to be very good for American household budgets. Unfortunately, the U.S. takes more pharmaceuticals and drugs than any other country per capita by far anywhere in the world. So that's highly regrettable. This is a serious problem that RFK is dealing with. But in any case, it remains true that this is the situation in the U.S. So it's going to be this kinds of change is what's necessary to lower the burden on the household budget and make the market function somewhat more normally. I think this is probably good news for consumers. Long term, RFK is working on doing something about reducing the addiction that Americans have and dependency that Americans have on pharmaceutical products.
So it is true that President Trump is doing a lot on this front, but is there a sense of temporariness in relying on executive actions in this situation? Can you talk about what role does structural policy reform play in addressing drug pricing?
Well, you've put your finger on something it's been a problem since the executive order started coming out earlier this year. The question is, well, how do we make these changes permanent? And that's why you need a Republican Congress to mirror all these changes in legislation. And this one's particularly problematic because essentially the pharmaceutical companies don't like what Trump is doing here. They prefer the status quo as it is because America's where the money is. America's which is the country with the generous health insurance programs that are paying unbelievable amounts of money for pharmaceutical products. Pharmaceutical companies like that. The pharmaceutical companies also have very big lobbies that are lobbying that lobby Congress, and many of these politicians feel a sense of dependency on their donations. So it's going to be hard to get this stuff mirrored in legislation, but your intuition is correct. And it's not just for this executive order. It's for all of his executive orders. They all need to be reflected in legislation. That's a major job for the White House right now, to get the Congress to go along with making these changes permanent.
Okay, Jeffrey, can we just get your comments on one more thing? How do you respond to the idea that lower drug prices will stifle innovation?
Yeah, I don't believe that. Their monopoly profits in the U.S. are so gigantic. One thing that they could do to save money and put it into R&D would be to stop squandering so much money on the advertising industry that is supporting so much media, right? So apparently that restriction's gone into place already. I think the FDA is going to demand a little more scrupulosity from pharmaceutical companies in explaining all the possible side effects of their drugs on their television advertising and newspaper advertising, which is going to make it much more difficult for them to advertise. So you take some of that advertising budget, put it into research and development, I think we're going to be good. The other thing is I just have to say, not as a medical professional, there's so many generics that are already available that are good drugs. We don't always need a patented innovation in order to guarantee health. Sometimes what we need is just better lifestyles, the use of proven generics, and good old-fashioned home remedies can go a long way too. We need to rediscover those things. That's a subject I'm going to be writing about in Epoch Times, I think, in the coming days.
All right, looking forward to that. It's always great to talk to you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
And a resolution in a case